live mode on public television. I mean, on on YouTube, talking about public television. Well, that shows you where my head is at. All these things become blurred in my mind. But I'm very, very happy and excited to welcome our guests to this week's Talkback. Our guests are Grace Lee, the maker of the Grace Lee Project, but also American Revolutionary, about Grace Lee Boggs, which I just saw the other day for the second time and loved it as much time too. Yoruba Richen comes to us, of course, no stranger to these programs. She's a filmmaker, screenwriter, director. We first talked to you, I think, Yoruba, about the Promised Land, about land reform in South Africa after apartheid. Not so after apartheid, on the land front. Most recently, the killing of Breonna Taylor and how it feels to be free. Many of your pieces have, both of you, been on PBS, on POV and other programs. But here we are talking about, does public television have a future? So I'll just start there. I still believe that there's a place for public television. But as you could hear in my interview, I was kind of, a lot of people I know don't want to watch, never think of watching, and only stream on places like this, Facebook or YouTube. Seems like you two still have a passion though, right? Yoruba?
Absolutely. You know, I actually just want to start the conversation because listening to your, how you intro the segment, this is such a different time in our country where we're seen to be, as you said, understanding the importance of public institutions. Ever since I, can remember, which is really the Reagan administration, it's been criticizing, trying to downsize, get rid of that public institutions were bad. And I love, and I'm hopeful in this moment that we're actually seeing a reversal. And of course, part of it is because of the terrible year that we've all been through with the pandemic. But we also are having, even from President Biden, I have to say, where we are looking at how government and public institutions help people and can inform people's lives. So I think that's a very interesting place to be having this conversation about public television and why it matters.
And Grace Lee, clearly you believe it matters. You believe that it matters enough to complain that it's not diverse enough. It's not staying up to date. Your petition went kind of viral, very powerful. You made some clear demands. What's happened since, and where's your level of passion lie right now?
Sure. Well, first, thanks a lot for having me. I mean, I think these conversations need to be public because we're talking about a public institution with a public mandate, that Beyond Inclusion, the collective that created the letter to the PBS president, Paula Kerger, we're all filmmakers who have had many work on public television. I mean, I initially wrote a piece in the fall of 2020 after having two series. Yoruba was part of one of them, and She Could Be Next, as well as Asian Americans on PBS in the summer of 2020 when everything was going down. We're absolutely invested. I mean, you asked in your closing comments, I mean, you stated, it's time to invest in public media. We've all invested in public broadcasting, our labor, our creativity, our resources, our talent. And all we're asking for, and all we ask for in the letter is, asking for proportional access to resources, the marketing support. This is the thing that is, that is not equal, in terms of when we look at what's happening with public media today.
Yeah, I mean, you lifted up statistics around Ken Burns specifically, 211 hours of programming over 40 years in a contract that goes till 2022, I think. You could tell in my conversation with Sylvia Bugg, who's, this is not her fault, the situation that we're in right this second. It's institutional failure. But she's quite careful to keep the programming away from the money. But I can't help but think that there's an inadequate, there's a disparity in how many resources a Ken Burns can bring to the table versus me or you or Yoruba. That's where I feel like the economics is just such an important part of this equation. People don't get that we have to raise every penny of the money that it costs to produce the programming that they see on public television. They think there's some kind of PBS God that funds us. Yoruba, you want to speak to how you actually raise the money for programming that appears on public television?
Oh, sure. I'll just say too that the economics, I think that's also where we need transparency, right? Because we don't know the funding and the marketing that is put behind a Ken Burns versus other BIPOC filmmakers in terms of their work. So what are those numbers? What are those what are those resources? And it's about transparency. I mean, that is we don't know. And so if we want to actually solve the problems, I mean, Grace and I'll speak for her, Grace too. We've been on a gazillion panels and gazillion, things about how to diversify in our industry and what can we do. And it gets frustrating because there are concrete measures that can be taken, like asking for this transparency around what are the resources, what are the numbers at PBS specifically, and quite frankly, it needs to be in other places as well. But I know here we're talking about PBS, and you would think that if we want to solve the problem, if these institutions want to solve the problem, then that would be something that would make sense to them. And yes, let's look at it and really dive into the nitty gritty. It's not just about hiring a filmmaker of color. That's only one part of it. And I know we want to talk about funding, but I also wanted to say, I was thinking about this earlier, that even when a filmmaker of color is hired or given those resources, it doesn't automatically mean that they're working with other producers, other people below the line who are also people of color. So it's not just that, it's really understanding the details around that production and who is getting access and who is getting training to help fulfill the mandate of public television.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk in the chat about the difference between different stations. And that's another thing too. Depending on where you live, you might think this programming pipeline is more or less diverse. It's very different depending, going from place to place. But Grace Lee, I'm not sure that you answered my question of whether there's been response to the petition. And if so, what kind of response?
Well, we received a response back from Paula Kerger after we wrote the initial letter saying, and there were notices in the press, also Ken Burns and Paula Kerger saying, yes, we should absolutely do better. We should continue to have these conversations, and conversations are fine, but they need to start with data, facts that we can actually parse and understand if PBS is actually meeting its public mandate, if it's meeting its stated goals. And so, I am a fan of Sylvia Bugg. I think it's great that she is where she is in the programming position. They absolutely needs to be more executive power from, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color in these positions, because the public television system doesn't reflect what you call, you're talking about how do we define democracy in some of your comments, right? There's a new deal for democracy, but as we look around and as we try to meet the moment that we're in right now, we have to make sure that not just the content, but the makers, but also the people who are making decisions in this institution reflect the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to a day when it won't be Asian American history. Will be American history. We'll include Asian Americans. We're not quite there yet. We've got a lot of work to do. But your series.
Well, I mean, I have to say, we did a series that was on public television called Asian Americans. It is American history. Right. It is through the lens of Asian Americans. But so many people, I mean, it just speaks to how very few people even know any of this history, right? Like, I'm an Asian American. I grew up, I studied history in college. This is not what I learned, right? So I think it's public television, especially, I think this is why we're so passionate. The media absolutely shapes how we view ourselves, how we view our history. And that's why this is Beyond Inclusion is so dedicated to making sure that public media reflects that.
Now, I think everybody, Yoruba, go.
Well, I was just going to say, in the last couple of days, we had that person, Rick Santorum, who said that Indigenous history what did he say? Native American history is not a part of American history, or there's very little American history, Native American history in America. I mean, that's the kind of, mindset that, that a lot of people in this country have. And I do think we have to acknowledge, and I don't really have an answer for this, that we're obviously in a deeply divisive, partisan culture, and with, a big, big divisions over what is the public good, and what is American history. These things are not, let's not pretend that we're all on the same page around this.
Well, let's talk about public goods for a second. I mean, one of the reasons I care so much about public broadcasting as a concept, and investing in it properly, is because I'm not seeing a similar struggle around other media being public goods. Like, it feels like we managed to win the broadcast airwaves and win a public broadcasting commitment like in the 30s, and then kind of renew it a little bit around cable in the 60s. Haven't done much since in terms of expanding or really selling that concept. And instead, a lot of people just say they're happy with being able to get onto all these privately owned platforms, which, absolutely, Netflix, YouTube, you name it, Vice, Vox, all the rest. I just want to have one place that is not completely determined by clicks
just one
and
place.
corporate underrating.
Just one place. Absolutely. Yeah.
But I am concerned that even listening to Sylvia, she's talking about we need to have mixed bottom lines. We need to have more revenue coming from more places. I mean, I can see the situation therein too of like, how do we fund this thing if Congress is going to destroy us every 4 years for anything that we do that's public? I don't know. What do you think? Grace?
I think that, I heard all of that too. I think that if your vision and mission is clear, if you really lean into why public broadcasting was created in the first place, it also was created in the midst of social unrest, racial reckoning, the late 1960s. And, it was incredible. I grew up watching television just like I think everybody else here, right? It shaped who I am. And, if PBS and other public media, were very clear about what it was trying to do in terms of its mandate, then I think audiences would know to go. I mean, we've worked in Yoruba. I don't know if this is the case for you. We've worked with, our programs have been on PBS, for years, but it's such a bureaucracy. There's no transparency. I don't know how it works, that's why we're asking for these numbers. Like, these numbers aren't available. The data is what will help us really figure out how to lean into that original mission. And whether it's doing a good enough job, and just from anecdotal evidence and just sort of lived experiences, I don't think it is, but there is potential, and that's why we're here fighting for it.
A lot of people sort of, I don't know what the word is exactly, but have a very rosy tinted view of British broadcasting, BBC. And when you said, we all grew up on public television, I didn't. I grew up on the BBC, and I had to go to Northern Ireland to kind of unlearn what the BBC had told me about what was going on over there. For example. So there are certainly problems with too much state intervention, but we're not even close to that at this point with public TV. What we have is a lot of corporate intervention and people very afraid. But I'm with you, Grace. I feel like, wow, especially watching those anti-monopoly hearings, those antitrust hearings in Congress, and you see, the Facebook guy and the Google guy and the people from social media explaining what their normal practices are in terms of surveillance and data collection and all the rest. You'd think if ever there was a moment for a media outlet that wasn't extracting your private data and spying on you, that you could actually get free even when expensive internet doesn't reach your house, this would be that moment. Get brave.
Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but the British government, the UK, taxes everybody, right, for the BBC.
You don't get a television. It's actually it's per TV set, and they've had to modernize it for a subscription to the feed. So the BBC is a tax. In the Netherlands, it's a tax on commercial advertising, which I think is very smart.
That's smart, yeah.
So you tax the ads that play on the other networks to pay for the public network.
Right.
The great thing about those systems is that they're self-perpetuating. You don't have to go and beg every few years, which I think was the idea for public broadcasting in the first place.
And it gives everybody, and maybe that is a way to to address these partisan divides, because everybody pays into it. One of the things that I still remember, I was in rural Indiana a few years ago working on a piece, and we were interviewing this young woman, and she was, it was, rural Indiana. And she was like, yeah, PBS is what I watch because that's it's free. I'm always interested in, what it is. And, it's one of the few places that I have to watch documentaries. She's a documentary lover. And I was like, wow, I never think about that as much being in New York or, in these urban centers, but how crucial it is. And they always talk about that too. The crucial is to places outside of these central cities.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience. We filmed a little section of Asian Americans. There's this interesting Roots program in San Quentin prison where, men are taking classes in Asian American history. And I met somebody in there who had seen all my films because they have public television in San Quentin. And that was kind of incredible.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I'm also reminded of the story that I learned in Appalachia, in Kentucky, with Appleshop Media, which was funded in the LBJ years as a program to give people skills that they thought was just going to be capacity building local people to leave the minefields and go and work elsewhere. But instead, what it did was so inspire people to tell the stories of their people. They went around interviewing their neighbors and telling the stories of what was happening in the coal fields. That it has grown into this extraordinary cultural hub that is alive as a place for performance and theater and art displays, has a great radio station, and also creates great cultural content. So that was another piece of it too, that the dispersed system itself should be an asset.
That's right.
To diversify the content, not a one-way pipeline to give everybody some kind of homogenized New York based or DC based or even LA based.
Yeah. I mean, and there's been incredible examples in public television, like, Melissa Hayslip's movie, Mr. Soul. I mean, why don't we have a program like that now, like a variety show, talk show about the issues of the day? I can think about like so many of us who work in public television, why we feel so strongly about these issues, we have, as I said before, we've invested so much in it. We can't just throw it away. And, back to your statement about the streamers and all of that, these tech companies, I mean, in a media landscape where so much is driven by algorithm, I mean, why not lean into the mission? The mission that is, rooted to democracy, actually. So that's all we're asking for. It's like, be more democratic, right? Be more equitable and just.
I so appreciate the work that you all do, you both do. And I keep being reminded of Grace Lee Boggs in your piece, Grace, where she talks about the conversation being the all-important kind of creator of new ideas and new knowledge and reflection. And I do wonder where that's gone on public television or kind of anywhere. Do you see signs of it, Yoruba, Grace? Anyone out there? Can we blow good oxygen on some embers somewhere?
Well, I do think that we're, again, because of the partisan divides and all the craziness that we are living in, that people are demanding and wanting and figuring out new ways to speak to each other. Yeah. It ain't always pretty, obviously, but it has to happen. I think if we want to save democracy, if we want to have more democracy, I think you mentioned Mr. Soul, and there's also, why couldn't we have something like that again? Black Journal was also part of that, time period and pushing, supporting voices and viewpoints that hadn't been heard on television before. Public television could be thinking about what to do today, in terms of, even like we had a Bill Moyers, like we could have a woman of color be the new Bill Moyers, who brought together, different voices and different viewpoints and you know, and looking at, you know, I mean, there's very creative ways that I think you could do that. And, you know, maybe that's what, I think that's part of what we need to demand. That's part of, and I do think with someone like Sylvia Bugg in her position, you know, we are hopeful that you know, that kind of creative thinking will happen.
Grace?
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea, Yoruba.
It just came to me because I grew up watching Bill Moyers and like having, and he did have different viewpoints, and, you know, and he was this like staple on public television. So let's rethink what it could be today.
Exactly, and meet the moment. I mean, so many other institutions are ahead of us, and I'm talking also about corporate media, right? Like, you know, I think, yeah, I just think there's so much possibility, and, you know, why not listen to those of us who have invested in the system, you know, to come up with some of these ideas. Yoruba can just do it on the spot here. They're talking in this conversation, back to Grace Lee Boggs, you know, like, I think there's so many opportunities, you know, of people who have worked in this medium and also have thought a lot about it, who care about democracy, who care about history, who care about the future. You know, we have a lot of ideas, and I think that's what we're just trying to spark a conversation about.
Well, I do think, as you began, Yoruba, now is a moment unlike any that I've seen in my lifetime, of people talking about the public goods, about a new, better New Deal, about the infrastructure of our society and our democracy. And in the chat today, there's fewer questions and more discussion about, we don't want to privatize like pharma, we don't want to privatize like charter schools, we want to embrace some of the programming at the margins of the networks and bringing it into the center, people talking about interning with Bill Moyers, the pipeline. I think that if anything, this show, my show, is about surfacing the talent that's out there. And the show that we launched last weekend, which is a collaboration with URL Media, which is a new women-led BIPOC media network of outlets all across the country. And they're going to be doing a sort of media roundtable, kind of meet the BIPOC press, if you will, on the Laura Flanders show every last episode of every month. Is, you know, a project that I absolutely think PBS could get behind, and we'll certainly send this conversation to Sylvia. I think her ears are very open. I got the feeling she was very on board with this kind of change. It's tough to move a battleship in a new direction. It may take a while, but we need to foment the enthusiasm and push, I think, Congress also to act, to improve appropriations and the system, so that it's not so vulnerable. I'll let you, you know, close. What are you working on now? What can people get excited about? I don't want to talk about the Oscars, but it does seem to me there was less focus, although people talked about it as the most diverse, and in lots of ways it was. There was kind of less political focus on diversifying, especially, as you said, Yoruba, down the production pipeline, behind the scenes. It's kind of mixed experience, I felt, last weekend. I don't know about you, but closing word.
Well, I'll start. I actually am working on a PBS Frontline, and we are part of a project. And this is I think this is actually a wonderful example of what PBS is doing and thinking differently. Their Frontline is doing a project called Unresolved, and it's about unsolved civil rights murders that were under the Emmett Till Act, and what happened to these cases, and why these cases haven't been solved. And they're going to be producing a podcast, an interactive art exhibit, and I'm co-directing a film that will be broadcast about one of the cases in Natchez, Mississippi. And I think we've seen, you know, particularly with Frontline, new leadership that has really brought in BIPOC makers and themes that has been different. I think it's a very good example of change that could continue to happen throughout the institution.
Grace?
I was really busy for the last 2 years. So I'm just kind of, you know, of course, continuing. I mean, the Beyond Inclusion work is, you know, I'm not alone. There's several of us working on this stuff, and that's really important. It feels like a moment to really lean into this as well. But also, you know, just thinking and developing other projects. that speak to some of these issues. I think I like Yoruba's idea. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to think about new ways to think about how, public media could be much better, utilizing resources that they already have, people who have already committed. And so I'm just thinking about that. I know it's vague, but it's something that, yeah. Like
Well, I
ideas.
see the future hosts of a good news show on public television.
Exactly. And Grace will, ponder and think and like, oh, these are just ideas, then come up with, some great
That's
project.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing all of it. Encourage people to check out the movies of our filmmakers on our at our website. We'll put up links. They're there already, I think. And I want to thank you both. We will send this to Sylvia. I'm sure she will receive it in the spirit it's intended. We are all on board. We want to make it bigger and better. And Congress, if you're listening, send more money to public television in a non-vulnerable kind of a way, an ongoing built-in stream. And don't do or die by Big Bird. There's a lot more to public television. Thank you both. It's really great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Your pledge, people. Bye.